So let's talk moving forward now. As you start to learn more about biology, biohacking, and all of that, what were some of the big lessons learned initially that led up to creating Novos? Like, what were you experimenting with, or what kinds of short-term effects or long-term knowledge were you gaining from all of the people that you were talking to? And what were some of the key landmarks, I guess, or events along the way that really started to make you look towards, let's get this kind of conceptual understanding out to the general public?
Yeah, well, I think some of it was coming down to my diet. So I was experimenting at first with the paleo diet, probably late 20s, early 30s. I then moved on to a ketogenic diet, and I tried to make that work for a long time, and I couldn't get it to work. What I was experiencing was, in some cases, just yes, I was getting the clarity of mind, I was focusing better, I was feeling energized and so on. But then as the weeks and months would go on, I would feel almost like a different person. Like my personality shifted somewhat. I was more serious. My mood wasn't as good. I wasn't as necessarily optimistic and so on. And so what I believe happened was that I was getting a lot of energy through perhaps stress hormones like cortisol. And over time, my neurotransmitters and my hormone levels were kind of falling out of place because I wasn't getting enough carbohydrate in my diet. And I believe that to be the case because by adding the carbs back in, it was almost like the light switch was turned back on every time I would do it. And I was stubborn. I tried so many times over the span of years to make it work. And I would go back to the keto diet and then go 3-4 months. And then, it would be so gradual. It was almost like a frog in boiling water. I wouldn't notice it until it was getting really hot. And then I would add the carbs back in and it's like, oh, wow, I was in boiling water. I should jump out of this, right? Now part of what I was interested in with the keto diet was things like reduction in mTOR. Now mTOR, mechanistic target of rapamycin, is a biological pathway that's stimulated by a protein in our body that will basically turn on growth pathways. It's also involved in our immune system as well. But essentially, when you have protein in your diet, you're stimulating mTOR, especially animal proteins and proteins high in leucine, an amino acid, and carbohydrates to a lesser degree, but still will stimulate it. And in a strict form of keto diet, you are extremely low on carbohydrates, and you're also relatively low or moderate intake of protein. And so the rest is coming from fat. And so learning about mTOR and the implications for aging, and also AMP kinase is impacted by a keto diet, and AMP kinase is also relevant to aging pathways and the hallmarks of aging and so on. I started to research that and understand that, and I wanted to maximize the benefits as much as possible there, while also simultaneously learning about longevity, as I mentioned before, through this other path in my life. And looking at the work of people like Aubrey de Grey at the SENS Research Institute, and then eventually people like, when it comes to mTOR, Dr. David Sabatini of MIT. I met with him at a mitochondrial summit at NYU Hospital. And so all of these things were kind of coming together at the same time. But experiencing something that was becoming mainstream, the ketogenic diet, and all of these purported benefits from it. But then in my real world experience, seeing that it didn't quite work out that way. And I studied it to the T. Every single thing, I spent hours each night trying to find different hints and clues. Maybe I was doing something wrong. Maybe I could add more potassium or sodium to my diet and maybe fix it, right? There were all of these ideas. And ultimately, no, it didn't end up working for me. And so that reinforced that notion in my mind of, first of all, what's good for you in the short term might not be good for you in the long term. Maybe I was feeling the energy in the short term, but as the weeks and months went on, maybe this was a preview of things that might be negative for me that I'm just not aware of quite yet. And maybe there are certain carbs that could do good things for my life. When you look at longevity zones, so there's something known as the blue zones. There's 5 of them in the world. This is the communities with the highest level of centenarians per capita. It's in like Sardinia, Italy, for example, Okinawa, Japan. It's in Costa Rica, California, and in Greece. They tend to have diets relatively high in carbohydrates. Like in Sardinia, they're getting as much as 70% of their energy intake in the form of carbohydrates. So there's like a missing link there. There's something about like the theory, the scientific theory of a keto diet being good for longevity. And then there's the practical reality of looking at the longest lived people and seeing that they're very, very far from ketogenic diet. And so this is just an example of some of the things that I was experiencing in my actual waking life, and trying to put the pieces together and to better understand longevity and the different aspects of what you hear promoted on the internet or from health influencers and so on, or that is theoretical in the scientific community versus the practical real world outcomes, and trying to find the middle ground where things actually are in agreement with each other.
Yes, that is definitely the key. And I like how you tried a lot of things. You experienced the practical aspect and implications, but you're also digging into literature, like actual literature, and trying to understand this, not just, on the surface level, but really trying to understand this, talking to people at conferences and summits, right? Talking to the actual researchers themselves, because yes, I would say there's oftentimes, especially with information so readily available today, there's a huge gap or disconnect between what is practically or clinically going on and what the research is actually saying and moving towards. Because as you know, looking through all the research, there's still a lot of gaps in literature or research that we still need to fill. But the information that we have, how can we make that applicable to, in your case, like everyone, right? To try to start to mitigate, or not mitigate, but maybe reduce the effects of aging, right? And that's what I want to talk to next, because what was some of the key events or ideas, or did you have a light bulb moment, epiphany to say, okay, let's take what I know now and let's work towards developing a company that can package this knowledge, information, resources, supplements, right? How did that kind of push you in that direction to go down this path?
Sure. And before I answer that, Andrew, one thing I want to say based on the last thing we were talking about is not only looking into the scientific literature, that's important, but it's also worth mentioning that I'm sure you're familiar with this because of your field of study, that what's actually published in the paper is only part of the story. And when you talk to the researcher, they are a treasure trove of information, of insider information, so to speak, of like the complexities and like their theories of why things are happening and hypotheses and different experiments they want to run and areas that they're questioning the outcome of their study and so on. And when you talk to the researchers, you realize there's far, far more to the story. And on the internet, you don't get that depth, right? And so there will be a new scientific paper published, and then all of a sudden, everyone, we experienced this at the company. There was a study that found that the combination of glycine and N-acetylcysteine, 2 amino acids, when taken at very, very high doses, can increase the amount of glutathione production in seniors. And glutathione is a very strong antioxidant, right? So it's something our bodies naturally produce, and you have less of it as you age. And since it's so powerful, the belief is that you should have as much of it as possible as you're aging. And so a lot of customers are saying, why aren't you selling this yet? And it's like, first of all, this is one study, right? But second of all, what you're also not taking into account is the amount of N-acetylcysteine you have to take in is in the order of multiple grams, 5, 6, 7 grams. Typically, when people take N-acetylcysteine, they're taking less than a gram when they take it for other reasons, like 500 milligrams, 750 milligrams. Now, there are studies in mice where they find that high doses of N-acetylcysteine can increase the occurrence of cancer. And there are theories why that happens. I won't waste time going into those theories, but the point is that there's a lot more to the story than what you get from looking at one paper in isolation, much less not even talking to the researcher. So there's a lot more that you get when you have a holistic understanding of the body of research, which no one individual has. But we as a company, we talk to many researchers. We have a team of 6 scientific advisory board members from Harvard, MIT, and the Salk Institute, world-renowned longevity researchers. But what we don't have on our website is the dozens of other researchers we're also talking to then formulate our positions on different topics like the one I just mentioned.
Yeah, before we go into the next part, I love that you said that, because that is so true. And it's giving people, one, I think, an inside peek as to how complex this is, but also what you're doing, and you're doing your due diligence to make sure that you get all of this information and you synthesize the literature, because like you said, one study, that is like literally a couple blades of grass in like a whole grass field, and you're just basing it off of that, right? So I think that's important in any research field, right? Research, talking to the actual researchers, their decades of work and understanding and theories and, all of the explanation that is not in that paper, that is exactly what's the gems, I guess, the hidden gems, right? But anyway, not to interrupt you, but you can continue. And then if you want to mention what kind of led you into developing NOVOS too.
Yeah, you asked about the light bulb moment. I had a former technology venture. It was actually of all industries, commercial real estate, and had the opportunity to step away from that and take some time to think about what I wanted to do next, what my next venture would be. And I was very fortunate to not have to focus on getting back to work as soon as possible and making money. I had a little bit of time to really think about what, if I had to choose, what would be the best thing for me to work on. And the answer was obviously health and almost definitely longevity, but I didn't know what. And I started attending conferences, and I would hear scientists present their novel perspective on a specific aspect of biology or hallmark of aging and a possible product that can come from that, but it was on the biotech side. And I was very honest with myself. I'm not a biotech entrepreneur. I've never done anything in that space. Could I learn? Sure, but would there be a learning curve? Yes. Compared to consumer technology, which is what I was, my whole professional experience has been, for the most part, on the consumer side of technology. So I knew consumers. I knew how to build businesses that speak to consumers. So that's what I wanted to do, but I didn't know what I could do. And so that's when I started to network with the scientists. And just by coincidence, I was at NYU Hospital. This is where my brain tumor was removed. And I was volunteering with the children in the pediatric ward, because when I was in the hospital, I promised myself one day I would give back. And it had been, I think, 16 years. So I had it removed when I was 15, 16 years old. 16, not 15. So when I was 16 years old. And then at 32, it's like that entire time period, 16 years has gone by and I've done nothing. And I was single, no kids. It's like, if I don't do it now, when am I ever going to do it? So I started to volunteer to spend time with the kids and kind of mentor them or be like a big brother to them for 4 hours a week every Thursday. And one day I was leaving and I had this in the back of my mind, like I want to start something in this space. And I saw a poster on the wall for what was called the Mitochondrial Summit. And I saw some researchers' names who I was familiar with from their work. And I was like, I got to go to this. I got so excited. I was the only non-PhD or PhD candidate at that event. But I cornered the scientists after they would speak and asked them questions related to longevity. And that's when I got the validation that I alluded to earlier, that there are natural substances that could positively impact these hallmarks of aging. And that it was distinct from what I thought medical doctors would say, that scientists said something a lot more optimistic. And that was enough of a validation for me that there is something here, and it is in an area that I can play in other words, consumer driven, something I felt comfortable with and that I could succeed with. So first and foremost was to figure out what could I create that I would want to take every single day of my life and to share with my family. And that was like the standard I held everything to. If I could create a formulation that met that standard, then I knew I had something to get started with to then create a business out of. And then I had, of course, a vision for something much bigger than that, which is what NOVOS is now becoming and what we will become. But it was that first kernel of a formulation that I wanted to take that no one was creating. And I wanted it in a convenient, easy to do carrier or form factor, which we created that as a powdered drink mix rather than taking a dozen pills a day. And that's how we started with NOVOS Core, our very first formulation.
Wow, that's amazing. And like you said, it kind of came full circle. And if you hadn't been in that specific place, you probably wouldn't have seen the poster and you wouldn't have met all of these professors and got to talk to them, right?